Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for listening to Sharegiving. I'm Rob Stoller, your host, along with my brother David, one of almost 20 million Americans caring for a loved one living with dementia, in this case his wife Barbara, diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's over a decade ago. Today will be part 2 of a 3-part series examining David and Barbara's 11-year Sharegiving journey. Last week we talked about the early phase, which we refer to as the onset, beginning with Barbara's diagnosis. Today's episode will explore the ethical quandary faced by David and so many other sharegivers of providing compassionate, loving care for someone he's been so devoted to, while at the same time taking care of his own health needs, including social interaction, meaningful conversation, companionship. It is not a simple topic, but it is central to the Sharegiver Solutions concept. David, let's talk about it.
Thanks, Rob. We call this segment the Ethical Quandary, which we'll come to. But as a general matter, after Barbara fell and the decline was extraordinarily sharp and pronounced from before the fall to after this 5 weeks that she had in rehab, during which she was reasonably aware of people that were visiting her, but, and I had the whiteboard there, as I think I mentioned. When she got home...
I'm sure you did mention that.
Yeah, I moved the whiteboard into her room. I was there to greet her in the morning and say goodnight to her in the evening. You could even see then that she was becoming more disoriented as time went on. And when she came home, we had to take precautions to safeguard her. She still was dealing with transitioning from chair to bed, things like that. In fact, I moved a bed into the library downstairs. But it became really clear after she got home that things were different. And her language, most noticeably, whereas before she was frequently at a loss for words and had relatively few words, period. Now she had a lot of words, but they were running together and they weren't making sense. Her level of comprehension also seemed to be different, which again took me by surprise.
Well, I think at that stage, I'm sure Barbara kind of unknowingly was clutching for anything familiar in general. And at rehab, there was nothing familiar. You were familiar. And I guess people who visited, but even that in a strange environment, which is like worlds colliding, I don't imagine Barbara really knew where she was and who these people were, except for you, for the most part.
Yeah.
It's a totally disorienting situation.
Right, and in a sense, it accelerated what was coming anyway.
I believe it.
Because dementia, especially in its more advanced stages, what she was manifesting is not uncommon.
Oh, no question. I don't think it's uncommon among people who aren't suffering dementia.
Correct. I mean, hospital stays anyway, they don't call it hospital delirium for nothing.
Yeah.
And quite often it has a permanent...
Dad suffered the same thing.
Exactly. So this segment is called Ethical Quandary because we had everything changed once again. Everything changed first when the diagnosis and our life changed, and we needed to accommodate a whole different approach. After the fall, everything changed once again, and it's so ironic that we had just come back from a fantastic trip to Peru. Fantastic for both of us.
Yeah.
Barbara was still very much aware enough to make good friends, to climb Machu Picchu. You know, we sort of celebrated a trip that
And she felt loved.
And she felt loved through her ayahuasca journey. So now everything has changed again. And connected to that, although it wasn't caused by it or occasioned by it, was my retirement. from running the entertainment company, which was headquartered in London, and in connection with which Barbara and I would go over almost every month. I certainly, because I was running a public company. And that was, part of the structure of our life at that point.
And just to roll it back a good way, because we haven't really spoken about it, that I really think you structured your life, your business. You had an apartment in Manhattan. Even the business you went into, I think a lot of it was predicated on Barbara's lifelong interest in the arts and theater and entertainment.
It's a great point.
In New York.
Yeah.
And it was done for Barbara in many ways.
Well, for Barbara and the girls. Remember, we are a theater family.
You are.
And I will tell you that the decision to acquire an interest in this company that I then ran, which was a public company, we made at a restaurant in the Upper West Side that at a Sunday burger night, when I laid out the opportunity and we put all hands in the middle, one on top of the other, and said, let's do it. So, yeah. And Barbara was, really excited about it.
Well, and she was central in all those decisions.
Yeah, clearly. She was the theater maven of the family.
Yeah.
So,
and that's all changed, obviously.
Yeah.
And that was, part of your retirement certainly was that the ultimate reason for doing it in the first place was no longer valid.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole another chapter, and I continued. That officially took place at the end of 2017. So it was really exactly the same time frame that Barbara had a fall, Dad had his heart attack. Everything was changing, and so for me, as the caregiver, I needed to develop a new game plan. My mindset hadn't changed. My mindset was, wow, I have to deal with this. This is different. The slide is more pronounced, and I need to learn more. We need to explore what we might do. I'm still thinking that there's a way to slow the progression of this disease, so I sort of redoubled, my efforts to find out what I could do.
Well, and you were also going through what everybody, presumably, many people listening today are going through, assuming, you have a job that you do every day, or Monday through Friday, 40 hours a week, or however many it is, and then all of a sudden you have another full-time job as a caregiver.
Yeah. And the job, I had that job because obviously Barbara required caregiving before, but it wasn't nearly as the same. Yeah, well, it was demanding, but I still could leave Barbara in the house, for example, and
go to meetings.
Yeah, go to a meeting, really scheduled, sure that Barbara was cool with it. In the morning, I would go to the gym at 6 in the morning. Barbara would still be in bed, and I would always say, honey, I'm going to the gym, I'll be back at 7 with coffee. That was sort of the magic.
And a scone.
Yeah, and a scone, if I didn't eat it on the way home.
Yeah.
And couldn't do that anymore. Different game plan now that I was trying to manage myself. So the whiteboard changed. Yeah. And now in the whiteboard, I was even more interested in, if not solving her language issue, but trying to figure out what it was, looking at certain exercises that we could do, trying to write words and numbers, working on these learning exercises that you may recall.
Sure.
There was a Japanese system that I was really interested in, called spaced retrieval, where in the simplest sequences of words and numbers, there was recognition of faces and celebrities. So I really focused on these efforts to...
Neurological stimulation.
Yeah, and enhancement.
Yeah.
And at the same time, thinking about myself, because I needed to make sure that I was, again, knew intuitively that I also need that kind of stimulation.
That sort of became either clear or brought to the forefront after the talk.
Right. But even before the talk, Barbara had her fall November 29th. January 1st, I posted on Instagram my first poem. And I was to post every single day for the next 500 days. And part of it was I created, this is maybe a fiction that we tell ourselves. It's sort of like, the Stoic challenge, where you imagine that there are the Stoic gods watching you to see how you do. This was a sort of a spiritual condition for Dad and for Barbara, that if I wrote every day, then it was almost like saying Kaddish, although they were alive. I was posting a poem, mine or somebody else's.
Kaddish, for those who don't know, is the Jewish mourners'
Yeah,
prayer.
Sort of a mourner's prayer. And as an aside, when our dad had a heart attack and Barbara was more seriously ill, I talked to a rabbi friend of mine and told him I wanted to start learning about Kaddish in the event that I would have to recite it. And the tradition is you recite it for a year following the death of a parent or a spouse. And he said to me, stop studying the Kaddish. You might Kaddish your father into the grave. Do something else. So that's when I said, okay, I'm going to do poetry, which I was always writing. But now I was posting it, and I was going to post it every day, no matter what. And I literally every night would be watching the clock to post by midnight.
So before we, move on, why? Why was that? How was that decision made? What did you tell yourself? Why did it become so important?
I told myself that if I directed energy to their healing or to their well-being by doing something like a prayer, although it wasn't praying, but it was writing, it was creating something, and it was doing it, with this commitment that was unbreakable, that was the best thing I could do for them.
What about for you? Where did your benefit come in?
And clearly for me, even though it was sometimes a strain, we'd be traveling, and I'd be watching the clock, that I'd have to go somewhere and write a poem or find one to post. At the same time, it was a fantastic creative outlet for me. It was a source of deep satisfaction.
Did that come as a surprise to you, or was that what you hoped when you started?
I wasn't at all involved in social media, and as you know, I'm still not. As far as Facebook and this and that, I wake up.
I don't know why I'm laughing. I'm not much technologically either, but
Instagram, friends of mine, mostly artists who were aware of my poetry because I'd send them poems, said, you got to keep track of this, and Instagram's the best way to do it. What I found in doing it was a sense of satisfaction, that I was actually writing on a regular schedule, learning, engaging with people that were reading my poems. So for me, it was a lot of the things I had on the whiteboard. I was stretching my brain, I was being creative, I was being social. That was a big change for me. And that also, as you are suggesting, revealed to me how important it was for me to have that outlet, and which I could do without really interfering with my caregiving, because Barbara would be asleep by 9 and I would be at the kitchen table at 9:05 writing a poem.
So that's kind of a gentle intro to the ethical quandary. And the ethical quandary, as we've spoken to each other, is the issue of catering to your own needs as a vibrant individual.
Extremely young 71-year-old.
Extremely young and active and eclectic individual. The other side being the need and the intention to cater fully to Barbara's
Right,
needs.
which required a real concentrated effort.
You're going to give 100% to Barbara and 100% to yourself.
Correct. Which sounds like a quandary at times.
I think so. Probably more so for many of our listeners than for David, because admittedly he's a different animal with probably 200% capacity.
So, which really brings us to the point. So I spent 2018 with a spouse that required substantially greater care, including not just the difficulties in communicating with Barbara, which led me to invent all sorts of strategies to have a conversation that was meaningful for me as well, which we can talk about.
And incidentally, that difficulty in speaking is referred to in clinical terms as aphasia.
Yeah.
Which we will talk about.
Certainly,
and we'll have experts.
An aspect of that, yes. And, so for me, who's spent my life with this incredibly literate person who was amazingly articulate, as you've pointed out, to all of a sudden not be having any conversation that was clear or meaningful.
Yeah.
So, for example, I would, during this time, when I'm thinking of strategies of how to enable her to feel like she's participating in a conversation, and for me to be learning or advancing my own interest, we would take a long drive and I would invent a conversation. So I might say, so Barbara, what do you think about artificial intelligence? I mean, just as a general matter, the kind of algorithms that, are now used to enable searches to find things that, we as human beings could never do on them. What do you think about that? And Barbara would either look at me like, what am I talking about? Or she might say something.
She would answer you.
And then I would say, well, okay, so this is what it's all about. And then we would have a whole conversation where I am playing out everything I know about a subject I'm interested in, satisfying me on a certain level, and Barbara would be in a conversation, which I knew and I know she acutely misses. And we also, one of the things we started doing after we returned from Peru and after the fall was hosting Shabbat dinners every Friday night, because I felt that we needed that social engagement, and Barbara included, even if those dinners were sometimes very difficult because everybody'd be in a conversation and she wouldn't. So,
which I know she is absolutely aware of. If there's conversation going past her without her inclusion, she is extremely sensitive to that.
Right. I mean, another thing that was new was if I had a phone call, if I was on the phone, she would come over and she'd be upset. She would be talking over me, and which, again, I could understand. So I had to now schedule all calls on time somehow that...
She was either asleep or...
Yeah, she was asleep or...
otherwise occupied.
Yeah, exactly. So, and during this time I did have some caregiving, because when I came back from, even before the fall, I had very modest few hours a day, somebody helping me. Now that became more important because it was more akin to nursing. And in fact, after we got home, under Medicare, we were entitled to a certain amount of home care and had a nurse that helped with occupational therapy and going up the stairs and removing things that might present risks. So, and I learned through that. Unfortunately, too late to have prevented the fall. But, so that was 2018, and a learning period, something where I needed to replace what I was doing career-wise with other activity, and also raise my game in terms of caring for Barbara.
And caring for
Myself.
yeah.
Yeah. So we spent a year, and then I had another moment that was a real threshold moment, where I had a conversation with my daughters, and I wrote about it. It's on our website, an article that was published called Everything Changed. And this was, looking back on it, extraordinary. I wanted to convene our three daughters, Samantha, Jessica, and Molly, with me at lunch, the purpose of which was to talk about everything that might be on their mind about Barbara, what they were afraid of, what they wanted, how they might want to participate, what they, were seeing down the road, how it was affecting them.
Why had you not had that talk previously?
I didn't have that talk before, for no good reason. I think it wasn't necessarily let sleeping dogs lie, but they were never pressing me on it. I knew just a little bit that, I'd learned that Molly was going to a support group for kids who had a parent with Alzheimer's. And, I was in close touch with the girls and was always filling them in on what was happening with us, and had encouraged them to call very frequently on the speaker so they could speak. But I think it was a mistake on my part, frankly. And when I had that talk, I was influenced very much. It was in the same time period that we had our talk with our parents, that I called, if you remember, the End of Life Luncheon.
Yeah, what a great name.
I remember.
Couldn't wait to go to that.
I don't know. In fact, you didn't know. We had a toast with wine, and I said, okay, welcome to the first annual End of Life Luncheon. And I'm sure you said, great name, Dave.
Yeah, this is fun.
Yeah, this is fun. But it was fun, and it was also incredibly helpful. We talked about everything with Mom and Dad, me, you, and Lee, that we thought needed to be discussed, while we were all able to have a discussion.
Yeah, I think there's a lesson in here somewhere. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I know in terms of sharing with the girls, it's probably never too early to do that.
Right. Oh yeah, no, I'm no doubt about it. And with our parents too, having that talk before the time comes when you couldn't.
Yeah.
So I was very mindful of that. I had just read a book that was going to go in our library called Being Mortal, which is all about how to structure that conversation. So I was affected by that, and I wanted to have that conversation with the girls. We start lunch. I start the conversation about what I want to talk about, and they interrupted me, led by Sam, the oldest, who said, Dad, stop. You need to listen to us. And in these words, pardon my French, Dad, if you go down, we are fucked. And I mean, that stopped me dead in my tracks. And I said, well, what do you mean I'm not going down? And what kind of language is that? And they then went on to say that they'd all talked. And they were, number one, worried about how exposed they were in their lives if something happened to me, given their mother's condition.
And subtext to all of it is their own situations health-wise.
Correct, which we're going to address. So they said, this is really untenable right now in our judgment, that you are doing all this by yourself, and we think it represents a real threat to your own well-being, and obviously we care about that.
Yeah.
We care about that for you, you're our dad, but we also care about it because you're taking care of our mother. And none of
And you're taking care of us.
Yeah.
I mean,
correct.
you know.
So, and yeah, and even a wider circle. So here's what we want. And so they then proceeded to lay out their conditions that they needed me to agree to. First of which was to get a caregiver that was more full-time. That I needed somebody that would be skilled enough to take care of Barbara as well or better than I was, and spelling me, so that I could, have time to do things myself. That was number one. Number two, they wanted me to go to see a psychiatrist, which I think they said a shrink, and excuse me for any shrinks out in the audience.
I think that psychiatrist is now in therapy.
Why did they want me to see a shrink? Because they were certain, knowing me, that I wasn't really dealing with my feelings.
And that you wouldn't go see a professional on your own.
Right, and it wouldn't occur to me that I needed to.
That's what I mean.
So I needed to agree that I was going to do that. And I had, at the time, no idea who I might talk to. And then the last one was, at the time and in retrospect, the most interesting and the most textured. And that was, Dad, you also need to live your life. You have been so committed, but we are worried about you. You have so much energy and creativity, and you are such a people person, and you've basically been denied the kind of relationships and companionship that Mom provided. And so
really such an evolved perspective that it's impressive and surprising that it came from the girls.
Correct. And as I'll relate, it was more nuanced than I was thinking in the fact of it. So I agreed, and all I said to them was, wow, this is stunning, and it tells me two things. One, that we need to have this conversation more regularly, at least once every few months. We need to do this, because this is all news to us, and which we've done more or less, and we just most recently did it on the high holidays. We grabbed some time, 2 hours worth, and that in itself was interesting, which is for a later conversation. Although I'll just say one thing about that conversation that we most recently had. We ended up, Jessica, I think, said she's having trouble remembering Mom, and when they were interacting as mother and daughter, that she was losing that picture. And they all agreed. And so we spent maybe the next hour recalling situations, experiences, moments where Barbara was Mom, and Tiger Mom at that.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful and sad. So
most things in this realm
are
beautiful and sad.
Yeah. So my conditions were...
Your poems are beautiful and sad.
Yeah. Molly's asked me one time, Dad, are you sad? Is everything okay? And I said, yeah, everything's fine. Poems, a lot of poems and poets tend to, experience melancholy when you're going deep into reflection. You can't just be happy. Melancholy is part of the human experience. So,
and probably, poetry sort of checks that box.
Yeah. I remember one poem that she, as an aside, I wrote a tanka, which is a 5-line poem, which I'm sort of specialize in. And the end of it was looking in the mirror at 5 a.m., it's in my book, and seeing the same face, the same nose, the same regret. And Molly right away called me in the morning.
Okay?
Dad, are you okay? So one condition was that we met regularly, which is really important. The second,
Why is it important?
because otherwise we have feelings that we as a family, and those of us who are sort of those left behind, need to share. It makes everyone feel better. Witness the last meeting we had where they all shared that they were losing their mother, even in this, video storehouse that we have of our life. And the story of our lives, all of a sudden, the early chapters for them were disappearing. And so through the conversation we had, we could share and laugh and remember how impressive and extraordinary and involved Barbara was in their lives. And those images then could not replace, but be there, as well as the images now of their mom who's disappearing.
So I'm just trying to relate this to the listener's experience, and when I ask why is it important, I mean, I think in that instance you're the family, you're the ones left behind, you're the family.
Right.
It's you guys now, and
Yeah.
Barbara is
Like she's left.
like she's left, but she hasn't left.
But she's still there.
So I guess it's something involved with the importance of just talking, communication between yourselves, so that things they're feeling but not saying don't fester. Things that you're feeling and not saying don't fester.
Right, and also doing things that make us feel better, that we can laugh about.
Yeah.
The other thing that I said, which is a big deal for me increasingly, is I said to them, you guys are all young, you're in your early 30s, and you're worried, I know you are, deep down, that this could happen to you. And the fact is that we all deal with genetics, and you've all been tested, and I think it's come back that you are only modestly, very modestly, more disposed to this disease than the average person. The real deal here, and what stirs the drink, is the way you live your life. It's your lifestyle and how you take care of yourself. So I need for you to commit to me, as I'm trying to do myself, to live a healthy lifestyle, which means diet and exercise and neural stimulation and managing stress.
Everything on the whiteboard.
And getting restful sleep. And all of those things are challenges, I know, to all of us. And there are clear ways to do it, and I want to share what I'm learning about that, because I'm trying to do it for myself. So I need your commitment to that, which they committed to. How it's manifesting, they all seem pretty healthy to me, and I also feel separately that as a sharegiver, this is a big part of my own mandate, to be an ambassador for the science of prevention. That, okay, I'm in it, and I'm dealing with this disability, but there's a way to make me feel better about it too, to take what I'm learning about it and myself and helping persuade others that they don't need to just worry about what might happen to them. They can almost assure with a real high percentage that they could avoid dementia based on the way they live their life.
Well, that's a function of mindset, and it's a proactive mindset.
Correct.
I mean, the alternative is to do nothing.
Yeah, I mean, and it is helping others. So as we've talked about before, it's powerful. So anyway, we had that talk. They gave me their conditions. I gave them back mine. But I was a little bit in shock after I left this lunch. And I also now had an agenda that I had to work on that was not on my whiteboard. One other thing, it wasn't just get a caregiver who can, be sort of like full-time.
This is the first talk.
This is their talk, yes. But they also said they wanted me to visit facilities, memory care facilities. They wanted me to assure them that I was going to do that, which was really shocking to me because it indicated to me that at least their perception was that their mother was advanced at this point and that this may be a step taken, sooner or later.
Well,
and I clearly had been avoiding that subject. And
well, it was clear mother was advanced because she didn't even really know who they were. Or if she knew, she couldn't communicate it. And certainly the relationship, the mother-daughter relationship, had all but disappeared.
Right, so I think they felt I was in a little bit of denial about this and that I needed to do that. And I did. I did do that. I visited all of those within a particular radius that would, if it came to that, make it easy for me and also easy for them to visit. And as I went through it, I was thinking through it, and at the end of it, that okay, this maybe I should do this. Maybe this is the best thing for Barbara. Then I went home after it, and I thought about everything that I'd seen and heard, and reached the conclusion, and really clear-headed about it, that it's best for Barbara to be at home. That whatever it will be that will change my mind, as I've been told will happen someday, hadn't happened. And that being home for her was the best thing. But also, based on everything that I had seen and heard and the experience I had of these facilities, it sort of informed my own thinking of the way to enhance her experience at home. And what I could expect if she was going to be at home, what might be coming. So I did that, and then I set about to finding a caregiver, which is much easier said than done. And I had a couple of people that I talked to that for various reasons I felt wouldn't be satisfactory. And I did have somebody who had been giving me a certain number of hours to maybe make more full-time, and she wasn't up to it. And in fact, had an incident with Barbara where Barbara got angry and struck her. And that was it. She was out of there. So I went to certain people I knew to ask them if they knew of anybody that might fill the bill. And I'm going to relate a conversation I had, which is really sounds as politically incorrect as you could get, but I think is useful. I went to somebody.
Well, useful or not, it's what happened.
It is what happened, but it's useful for the reasons behind it. I went to somebody and I told him, and he said, you need a Mexican. And I did a double take. What?
What does that even mean?
Yeah, what does that mean? How can you even say that? And he said, what I mean by that, in my experience, is that they have an extraordinary sensitivity to people that are in pain or impaired, and an extraordinary capacity for helping and for serving, and particular feeling for family. And finally, they have no ego. They
don't take things personally.
Don't take anything personally. That's what you need.
Yeah.
And so, as it turns out, I did find somebody who is with us now, and has been extraordinarily helpful and has grown in the role, and who's Mexican.
Yeah.
And so I offer that only as these are the things for anybody that's looking for a caregiver,
Yeah.
that those are as important or more important than skills at toileting and getting somebody to take a shower and meal preparation and the like, all of which Christina has does and has learned to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't think David's saying you have to find a Mexican woman to take care of your loved one, but you have to find someone with those characteristics that you were advised are more common among Mexican
Yeah, I mean,
people.
Who knew? But in any event, she's been phenomenal, and
Yeah.
and those are the qualities that stand out.
Yeah. The part about not taking things personally, because, Barbara is subject to fits and spurts and gets upset. I don't think she's been violent per se, but she could take a slap at you once in a while. I've seen that.
Yeah.
And you need someone who can withstand that.
Not just withstand it. I would say this, that also is intent on enabling Barbara to retain as much dignity as possible. We had one
So
caregiver
important.
that was really skilled in all of the skills, including skilled nursing. But Barbara would do something and she would sort of look over Barbara's shoulder at me and roll her eyes.
Yeah.
And that was it. Forget it. So
we're back on the empathy thing
yeah,
again.
I mean, dignity is huge at
Empathy
whatever.
and compassion
Yeah,
are absolutely essential.
yeah, fundamental. The second thing was going to a shrink, and once again, I networked a little bit among friends and friends at the temple, and recommended to me a guy that was in Lambertville nearby, who they said they heard great stuff and really good guy, and all those same qualities. And I visited with him, and it was strange for me because I'd really never been in that kind of dynamic. And without going through the session, he really did want to focus in on what I felt about my situation, and really pressed me and got me to say finally, which was really difficult for me to say, that I was lonely. And when I sort of coughed that out, he said, good, now say it again. Say it again. And I did, not much more easily. And he said, okay, that's really important. That's real. And so what are you going to do about it? And, I said, well, I don't know.
I'll know.
I don't know. What should I do about it? And he said in so many words, well, look around. Is anybody out there that you'd like to talk to, that you could be attracted to? And that was sort of startling to me, and raised the subject of this ethical quandary. That
Exactly.
even though I had been given, at least as I heard it in my lunch, license to go out, live my life, which might mean meeting other people, that might mean meeting someone, the fact of it was, sort of shocking to me to actually think that way, which I hadn't thought that way in my whole marriage. Recognizing that anybody in long-term relationships can, as Jimmy Carter said, occasionally lust in their heart, or, see somebody that is really attractive. But I hadn't acted on anything like that. So
that is the essence of a quandary. The
Yeah.
ethical quandary is what do you permit yourself to do? Being lonely is not a healthy place to be.
Correct. And, obviously many of us are from time to time, even in happy relationships. But especially for the family member caregiver with a spouse who's no longer the companion that he or she once was, I think it can be really acute and is not discussed. And I think this is what my daughters really were getting at in dealing with my feelings about my situation.
Well, at least they were starting to peel it back.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't so clear. So the quandary, then I had to work through with his help. I went 3 times, and he said, "Okay, well, is that enough?" And I said, "Yeah, I think it's enough. I tend to do things in 3s." He said,
didn't
"Really?
know that."
That's it?" I said, "Yeah, that's it."
Thanks, Doc. I'm gonna go peruse my ethical quandary now.
But the way I looked at it and thought about it, and he helped me to think about it, and he was really encouraging, was I'm married and I've taken a vow that I've taken seriously, till death do us part. And so that's what I would imagine. Obviously people get divorced, so the spouse dies or you split. But this was, neither. This was my wife sort of leaving this relationship that we'd had, and not because she wanted to, obviously quite the opposite. But it was sort of like I had been, and my daughters had been robbed of the wife and the mother that we'd had, and that my status was ethically equivalent to that, in many ways, of a widower who'd lost his wife.
Yeah.
And so looking at it analytically or psychologically, in that circumstance, one would be encouraged, and maybe a spouse that had died would have so encouraged previously her husband or his wife to go meet somebody, and you should be happy. And I'm no longer there, so
Yeah.
you should be happy. And that I realized was my situation.
Yeah. I don't think it could be more, there could be more of a dichotomy between your relationship isn't there, but Barbara's still there.
Correct. So that still doesn't make it any easier. If I could resolve the ethical quandary in my mind, and that's how I did resolve it, still, how do I act on this? Because, I'm not 15 and it sort of feels that way. The idea of meeting somebody or going on a date or being set up was, really foreign. And that then becomes the first step into truly a parallel life, which, we'll take up in the next session.
That's going to do it for today. And I know that's a lot. And there's probably much more to speak of there, but that is the introduction and the overview to the ethical quandary.
Right.
Okay, well, thanks so much for joining us today, and we will be back next week to speak of the parallel life.
Okay.
Okay, Davey. Thanks, everybody.
So long.
Thanks so much for listening today. We hope you found the conversation stimulating, relevant, and enjoyable. Dr. John D. Kelly IV, in a previous Sharegiving podcast, had reminded us that up to 74% of dementia caregivers suffer some form of depression. The Sharegiver's physical and emotional well-being is essential to effective, compassionate care and is a central tenet of Sharegiver Solutions. Hey, there's a reminder. Please visit the website at sharegiversolutions.com to tell us something about yourself, your thoughts, perhaps your situation. After all, sharing is the way of caring, and singing is good for the soul. So let's do it, David.
I got shoes, you got shoes, all God's children got shoes. When I get to heaven, gonna put on my shoes, I'm gonna walk all over God's heaven, heaven, heaven. When I get to heaven, gonna put on my shoes, I'm gonna walk all over God's heaven.
Right on.
Right on.